Hello, everyone. Welcome. So excited to be seeing you all today to be talking about generative engine optimization, the future of search, AI, bunch of hot topics. I know people are probably continuing to trickle in because it's just hit 1 o'clock. So as people continue to join us, I will go ahead and give just kind of a quick overview of who Nexus is. So Nexus Marketing, we are a digital marketing agency based out of Atlanta, Georgia. So if you hear some y'alls in there, that would be why. And our specialization is in inbound lead gen and demand gen for businesses that are selling into mission-driven industries. So our clients are typically software and service providers who are then selling to nonprofits, healthcare organizations, educational institutions, associations, those types of organizations. I think we have a couple of clients that are on the webinar today. If you are a current Nexus client, welcome. We're so happy to have you. And if you are not already, we are thrilled to have you as well and excited to get to introduce you to kind of our work and our thought leadership. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I dive into content. We do have a team member in the chat in case you are running into any technical difficulties. So you can find them under Nexus Marketing. If you have any issues, feel free to either message them directly or leave a note in the chat. They can help you out. Please feel free to use the chat for whatever you'd like. You can drop questions in there, thoughts, comments, all of the above. There's also a questions feature on the bottom right of your screen, and we'll have some time to take questions at the end, hopefully. So please feel free to leave your questions there. All right, it is 1:02, so hopefully people are kind of ready to go. So I would love to get started with a quick poll that I am going to publish now. I would love to get a sense from the group that is here today, before we dive into talking about GEO, what is your current kind of status in terms of what you're doing for GEO? Is this something you are actively thinking about? Maybe you haven't really started to think about yet. Maybe you're somewhere else and you want to share that in the chat, please feel free. I will wait for a couple. Oh, I see a couple of responses coming in, some planning stages, some people who are already implementing GEO. Would love to hear kind of how people are already starting to implement these best practices. Some people who are continuing your SEO work. Great. Okay, so we've got some people kind of all across the boards. Fabulous. Great. All right, well, I will go ahead and get started with kind of my normal content. I think it would be useful, if my slide deck will move. There we go. I think it would be useful for us to start and talk about just kind of what search behavior is looking like right now. It is shifting. What we are seeing and what all the data is suggesting is that zero-click search is on the rise. So for those of you who may not know what that is, basically zero-click search is when you Google something, whatever is there already on the search engine results page. I'll often refer to that as a SERP. So if you're not familiar with that term, that's what that is. And whatever Google shows you on the SERP answers your question, and you don't actually have to click through to a result. With AI overviews, Google, that is increasing. There are more and more queries that Google is able to answer without you actually having to click through anything. The data is a little bit, there's some conflicting data around actually how many searches are resulting in zero-click search. What I kind of have found is somewhere between the 25 to 50% mark. I'd be curious to hear if other people have seen other data. I saw some conflicting numbers as I was doing some research around what that data looked like in 2024. So again, I'd be curious to hear from y'all if you're hearing something else, but it's a relatively significant number, right? And so I think it is something to think about. It's something to be aware of. What I will say, I think, those of us who have been doing SEO for a long time know that this is not necessarily a new trend with AI overviews. I think it has accelerated with AI overviews, but featured snippets have been around for a long time, and featured snippets fall into a very similar space where, if you're just looking for a definition or a yes or no answer, or just a little, a very, very top of funnel query, oftentimes a featured snippet can achieve that as well. So that has certainly been accelerated by AI overviews because those can appropriately answer a much larger number of queries than, say, a featured snippet. But this isn't new, and it's not something to be, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's not something to be overly concerned about if you are still seeing strong lead gen, even if your organic traffic is down a little bit. And we can talk about that a little bit later. The other thing, obviously, that we need to address is that ChatGPT and other AI tools are rapidly on the rise, right? I've pulled some ChatGPT user numbers here. I think that is, I'd be curious to hear if anyone else feels differently, but I certainly feel in my own life that is like the most prevalent tool that people I know are using. Obviously, there are loads of other generative AI tools as well. And that has seen a huge increase in users over the last couple of years. I saw a number recently that ChatGPT is on track to hit 1 billion users by the end of 2025. Again, I think I take all of those numbers with a little bit of a grain of salt. One, we won't know until we hit the end of the year and we actually see. And then also, of course, with any of these tools, there isn't just exponential growth indefinitely. So something to think about. But I think overall, people are using these tools. It is clear that is increasing and increasing. And so while Google is still more prevalent than these AI tools, it would be silly not to be thinking about this. And it sounds like a lot of people in this group already are starting to think about that and implement best practices, which is awesome. Really good to see. And I think that is exactly what we have talked about with all of our clients, where it is the smart thing to do to start thinking about these things and to start future-proofing your marketing to address the increase in AI. So for those of you who may not know exactly how these work, I will just like a quick note here. Basically, generative AI tools rely on LLMs that, your traditional LLM is pre-trained on a certain amount of content. So the way that your very traditional LLM worked is that you'd ask a question, it would go back to its bank of content that it was trained on to answer that question. And therefore the answers were somewhat limited. If the AI hadn't been kind of taught anything about that topic, you wouldn't necessarily, get an answer that was fully fleshed out, because it could only rely on the content that it had been trained on. How generative AI tools work now is they use a process called Retrieval Augmented Generation, RAG, where basically you ask a question, it will feed that query back to Bing. It'll pull a bunch of information from Bing. It will then combine the training it already has and the fresh content to give you an augmented answer. So that is typically how they work now. With ChatGPT, I think the default setting is for it to use the internet enriched answers, and I think you can toggle that on and off if you want. But I think that's the default setting there. So this is kind of how that works. One thing to note here is that Bing is really at the center of these AI tools. Most of these AI tools they're using the Bing index, not necessarily Google. Obviously, I assume Google Gemini is using theirs. So something to think about, for SEO, Google has always been such a dominating force. Most people are not necessarily thinking about how their website is showing up on Bing, but making sure that all of your content is being appropriately indexed by Bing. Super important nowadays, because that is what most chat or kind of ChatGPT and these other generative AI tools are using for that RAG kind of content retrieval process. Okay, a couple fundamental principles of GEO that I think it would be really relevant for us to talk about. One is context over keywords, right? With SEO, we're so focused on specific, oftentimes kind of short keywords that our content is centered around. But GEO and generative AI tools really want to prioritize a diverse user intent, comprehensive answers, kind of moving beyond like, does this piece of content match this keyword and therefore feeding it as a result. That's just like not how the AI tools work. And so really wanting to make sure that your content is created in a way that matches this like much more diverse user intent that is way, way, way less keyword focused than the way that people use Google. I mean, I don't know about you, but like most of the prompts that I give my ChatGPT are like sometimes multi sentences. And that's just, again, not really relevant to the way that we think about keywords for SEO. Another piece here is that with GEO, generative AI tools are synthesizing content from multiple places and then creating a unique response. So it is not, our focus needs to be less about like, do we have one really well optimized piece of content on our site that Google will read, will like, will understand, and will rank. These AI tools are pulling content from all over your site, not just your individually optimized pages. Now, it is still, again, important for you to have those really well optimized pages, but you want to be thinking about what is your brand language across the totality of your website? What is your brand language across, your references on other websites, your LinkedIn, your social media, all of those things that GEO could be pulling from. Again, you want to make sure that that's consistent, high quality, and is being formatted in a way that's going to help with that diverse user intent. And then again, to kind of sum it all up, the enhanced user experience, AI tools like ChatGPT, they're really trying to deliver like really accurate, specific, personalized results. And so trying to think through, if I were a user, what type of queries would I be looking for? What kind of answers would I be looking for? What do I believe that the AI tools are going to be spitting out? And then how can I tailor my content to reflect that user intent, that end result from the generative AI tool? So a couple of things to think about there. When we're thinking about GEO versus SEO, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here because I think a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory. But again, I think the real kind of key difference, right? SEO much more focused on like ranks, clicks, keywords. GEO much less focused on like clicks and ranking. I mean, obviously you could put in a prompt that says like, give me the top 10, I don't know, nonprofit software platforms, or give me the top 10 healthcare consultant companies, right? And that you would kind of get that a little bit more of like a SERP, a result that would be much more similar to a SERP. But overall, they're giving you like that direct answer, not necessarily focused on a click-through rate. And so it's a lot more about visibility than it necessarily is about like a specific piece of content ranking. The other thing that I think is really valuable to talk about is this last row here on future impact. I think for SEO, what we are seeing and what we will continue to see is that for a lot of those like very, very top of funnel keywords that are really educational, informational focused, those are, SEO is likely going to be less and less valuable for those kinds of keywords. AI overviews are already, right, reducing the click-through rate for those kinds of keywords. But also I think more people are moving to these generative AI tools for those more like educational learning focused queries. And so, for those top of funnel areas, SEO is just probably going to be a little bit less relevant over the course of the next couple of years, and GEO is going to become more and more relevant. Okay, a couple of challenges when it comes to GEO. One, of course, loss of traffic. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but AI-driven answers, whether or not that is like in your ChatGPT or your other actual like AI platform, or whether that's an AI-generated answer on the Google search engine results page with an AI overview, it's likely going to reduce traffic. Now, what I was saying earlier around like not necessarily freaking out over this if you're tracking the right things. For us as an agency, we have always had a highly lead gen focused lens when it comes to SEO. Organic traffic is great. Eyeballs on your site is great, and that's important. But if those aren't converting into actual qualified leads, doesn't really matter. So for us, total organic traffic is a bit of a vanity metric. It's useful to gauge maybe overall progress, but it's not necessarily actually what we care about. We care about the quality and the quantity of the leads that are coming through. So what I would really highly recommend, if you're seeing a dip in organic traffic and you're feeling maybe a little freaked out about that, what I would do is I would compare that data to the data you have around lead attribution and lead gen from SEO. If you don't have that set up, I would really highly recommend setting up some very clear lead attribution for SEO efforts. And I think what we're seeing with a lot of clients is that their lead gen is still very strong, even if their overall organic traffic has taken a dip, which basically means that for those really top of funnel queries that AI is kind of taking over and commandeering, those weren't really queries that were leading to like actual inbound interest in the first place. So again, yes, like your boss is looking at your data and they're saying, well, why is our organic traffic down? It's not really a problem if your leads are still strong. I'd be curious, maybe, if this is something you're working through, would love to hear from the chat. Like, is this something you're tracking? Is that trend something you're seeing as well, where you're seeing that organic traffic dip? Would be really curious to hear kind of some feedback from y'all around what that looks like. Moving on here, there's a certain level of unpredictability with GEO in a way that, I feel like SEO has been around for a long time. There's a pretty set kind of process to get your content to rank on Google, and that is pretty clear. It's more of a matter of like the right execution and strategy behind that, but it's a relatively predictable process. With GEO, it's a little harder to predict exactly what content AI is going to choose. It's just, we know less about those criteria. It's a little harder to predict there. Content complexity is another challenge. Your content needs to be authoritative, contextual, conversational, like really geared towards that. And that just, it takes more time. It's more challenging to create. Your content has to be richer, more complex, all of those things. And that's a lot. And not every team has the bandwidth. We also know that AI really prefers things like images, videos, infographics. Those can be complicated to create, may not have the resources to create them. It's just kind of an added element there in terms of, what that best practice in terms of content looks like. Now, a lot of those things are, again, really valuable for SEO as well, but they are increasingly really, really important for GEO because these AI tools, right, can look at loads of things across various areas, not just necessarily the written content on the page, but your videos, your images, all of those things across various platforms, not just necessarily your own website, too, across your social media, all of those types of things. Let's see. Oh, I see a question that I think normally I might wait, but I'll probably go ahead and answer this now because we're talking about it. So what do you mean by AI prefers this content? Great question. So AI, it is not necessarily right. If you put ChatGPT into, like, if you were to put, what is the best whatever into ChatGPT, it's not going to spit out a video for you. But oftentimes what we're finding is that content from like video resources, graphic resources, those types of things are getting cited more and more. And that's like really good for AI to digest. That's considered very I can't come up with the right word that I'm looking for right now. Clearly, I haven't had enough coffee today. But overall, just it is more likely to pull that kind of content. It likes it. And so having that kind of rich, diverse content on your pages is really valuable. All right, tracking performance. It's harder, we find, to track kind of like directly how much your brand is being cited by AI tools, right? You can't just go in and say like, well, we're showing up for these number of keywords in this position that translates to this number of impressions. Like the tools are just not, it's just harder to track. We can track referral traffic, obviously, from say ChatGPT, but it's a little harder to know how often your brand is being cited. It's also hard to know because there's such a larger diversity of queries. There's not that same data around like X number of people searched for guacamole recipe in a given month, right? There's just not that same kind of understanding of volume around like keywords the way that you have with SEO. So it's hard to track a lot of the same things that we do for SEO. There's also this inherent piece, right? The algorithm is always changing, trying to keep up to date. That's a challenge. Reduced brand control, I think, is a really interesting one to think about. Thinking through like when Google is ranking pages on your site, those are all pages that you have created, you have complete control, right, over every single word that is on your brand's website. With generative AI tools, they're not necessarily using that same language or representing your brand in the way that you would. Now, most of the time, right, they're reading your website, they're pulling a lot of that language from your website, but it's not, you don't have that total control over the language that your brand is being referenced with the way that you do on your own website. And then I talked about this earlier, but just higher production costs. It costs more to create video resources. It costs more to create graphic resources. It takes longer and more resources to create these like really comprehensive pages. So that's another challenge as well. Just having the resources on your team to really create GEO oriented content. Couple of notes here around structuring your content for GEO. One really important thing that I would really recommend everyone implement is schema markup. So making sure that certainly your most important pages use schema markup so that it is really fast and easy for the AI tools to understand what your content is. It's a pretty straightforward implementation, but really, really valuable when it comes to GEO. That conversational tone as well, trying to create your content in a way that is going to mimic the way that these generative AI tools are going to spit out answers, really valuable. Again, we've talked about incorporating different types of content, so I won't necessarily go into a huge amount of detail there because we've already talked about it a little bit, but also some structured formats. So thinking through like, are your headings really clear? Are you using lists, bullet points, very like concise, clear paragraphs to make sure that your information is really easily kind of extractable and pulled from the content? Because again, you're going to probably have like snippets and things from each piece of content that are getting pulled and referenced, not necessarily a piece of content in its entirety. A couple of things here about leveraging that visual content. One, really recommend having a video transcription. Super useful for both the AI, but also just for accessibility best practices. Again, using alt text and descriptive tags to make sure that AI can understand like the context of the image that you're using, not just the image itself. And then mobile optimization. This one's interesting, making sure that all of these resources are really useful on mobile. One, we know that that's where Google has a pretty strong preference in terms of like mobile performance for websites. It's a little unclear how some of the AI tools feel about, as if they can actually feel, about mobile versus desktop. But given that for a long time, we have known that that's what Google typically kind of favors, it's really, it's important that you make sure you're thinking about the mobile optimization of some of these media pieces as well. All right, we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to kind of speed through some of these, highlight a couple that I've, haven't talked about. So structure your content. We've talked about that. Schema markup, meta descriptions, clear headings, like really making sure that your information is like very clear, easily accessible by AI, very easy for these tools to quickly understand. Because again, they're generating this immediately. So wanting to make sure that that process is as smooth, quick possible, and that structured content can be really valuable. Incorporating credible data, we haven't talked about that as much, but what all the research is showing is that these AI tools love to cite a statistic, they like research, they like having really authoritative things for them to cite. And so using that in your content makes it more likely that your content is going to be referenced. We've talked about multimedia. I won't go into that further. Citability as well, making sure that you're using like concise, clear sentences that can be pulled out, really valuable. It makes it easier for your content to be referenced. So trying to think through again, like if an AI tool was pulling this out to use, would they have to pull out an entire paragraph to get the point across, or are you using kind of shorter, concise pieces that they can pull out and incorporate into their synthesized answers? Content over keywords, again, we talked about that. People are not necessarily putting in short keywords into ChatGPT. It's still important for SEO. It's still important to use those keywords, but you need to be focused on more of that like long tail content over just using those keywords. Building authority and trust. So one, making sure that your content is really high quality, it's research backed. And we haven't talked about this yet, but establishing author expertise is really, really valuable. So do you have an attributed author to the content that's on your blog versus does it not have an author? Does that author have a bio where if you click into it, it will have some information about their previous work history, their expertise, maybe a link to their LinkedIn or other social media, if they've done podcasts or webinars or written other articles for other publications, wanting to establish that who is putting out your content is an expert in their field, really, really valuable. Again, that is not necessarily something, right, that Google would crawl and rank content based off of. But because AI tools are looking at every area of your website, it's important. And they're more likely to cite websites and to pull content from websites where there's that clear demonstration of authority. We've talked about a little bit the diverse user intent, just thinking through, people are using these tools for various things. So thinking through more creatively, what kind of content are going to address like all of these various use cases for ChatGPT. They're not just necessarily like looking for an answer to something. They might be looking, to evaluate different things, to edit things. I mean, there are a million different ways, right, to use these tools. So get creative in terms of what your content can help address. And then also, making sure that all of the strategies you're implemented are really tailored. I think one thing that's in common across all the different industries that we work in, right? Nonprofit, association, healthcare, all of these, they all have kind of specific operational methods, right? They all kind of operate a little bit differently, move differently. Their employees, right, have different kinds of responsibilities. It's not just like your standard kind of rev gen model for all of them. And so wanting to make sure that you're really keeping that like targeted specific audience that really well in mind, and thinking through not just how are the general population using ChatGPT, but like your specific audience, how are they using it? What are they looking for? All of those things. So with that, one thing that I want to highlight is our approach to GEO. I know we're coming up on time, so I will stay over for a couple of minutes to answer some questions. So if you need to hop off, thank you so much for joining. If you're able to stay around for a few questions, that is great as well. So our approach to AI visibility is our GEO scorecards. we have created 2 different scorecards, one looking at brand entity, one looking at author entity, where we go through and look at like 60 plus different factors and rank organizations on how they're doing and come up with an implementation plan to improve a bunch of these different areas. If you're interested in learning more about our scorecards, having a conversation about what an AI visibility project would look like with us, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk about what this would look like for your organization, or just kind of walk you through the things that you need to be thinking about specifically and help you highlight some opportunities there. All right, so let's look at some questions. Oh yes, Katie had asked if we'll have access to this deck. Happy to share. The recording will be sent out, but if you specifically want this deck, I'm happy to send it as well. Let's see. Any other questions around, let's see, do headers matter more? Oh, it looks like your question might have gotten cut off, Jenny. Let's see. Oh, another Jenny, but spelled differently than mine. Oh, do headers matter more than the content, or should we be focused on the body text? The text is really what is the most important. Like, having high quality text, high quality, authoritative, rich content definitely is what matters the most. I think for headers, making sure that they make sense, that they're clear, that they're easy to digest, especially like subheadings, breaking up, not necessarily just like the H1, but using H2s, H3s, even beyond, helping like segment your content into different areas to make it a little bit more digestible and clear. Super useful. So they definitely don't matter more, but I think they can be a really useful tool in helping kind of like segment the different areas of your content, especially as you're trying to create richer, more complex, maybe longer form content. Great question. Let's see. Oh, we had a follow-up question. Okay, perfect. Oh, for some reason, this keeps cutting off the full. Let's see, with headers, why is this cutting off? Sorry, Jenny. Oh, there we go. It kept cutting off the back end of your question. With headers, is posting them as questions better than just normal titles? That's a great question. I think that it probably depends. I think that having slightly more detailed, descriptive headers is more valuable than generic ones. Whether or not you answer those, put those in the form of a question versus put those in a form of like a statement, I think matters less than having them be more descriptive and kind of more segmented. Not everyone is putting ChatGPT. They're not necessarily putting questions in. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. In my normal use case, right, I am more often like giving it a directive than necessarily asking it a question. That might just be my own anecdotal experience. So I wouldn't get too in the weeds about like, do they have to be formed as a question? Do they have to be formed as a statement? And more so making sure that they are detailed, segmented, and a little bit more kind of like specific than say like your generic kind of like 2-3 word header that we might normally see for some of that kind of content. All right. I see, you are so welcome, Jenny. I see a question from earlier around, are people not concerned about LLM hallucinations with regard to using an LLM as a search or research tool? I'd be curious to know, Raul, if you're still around, kind of what you mean by LLM hallucinations. that's not something I've really encountered. Would love to give you my thoughts there, but I think I'm not exactly sure what you're asking for. I'll give you a second to type if you're still here. I can't tell. And of course, if anyone else has any other questions, would love to answer them. I know we've gone a few minutes over, so if you need to hop, totally understandable as well. I see a couple people typing, so I'll give it a minute before I wrap us up here. Oh, okay. Yeah. GEO using incorrect information. I think it is probably coming from a couple of different areas. One, like, it can only use the information that is out there. And so if there is incorrect information out there, which, as we all know, right, there is certainly a lot of incorrect information on the internet. I think it is very possible that it is pulling from an incorrect source. I also think that there's a certain element of complexity where, depending on what you're asking, it may not necessarily interpret like the content that it's sifting through correctly. That's not something, I mean, it's tough. It's not something that I am inherently super worried about. I think it is the reality, right? Even with Google, there is misinformation out there and incorrect information out there. So, it's not something that I'm necessarily overly worried about, but I do think it comes back to that piece around like brand, that like reduced brand control, where, I would probably recommend going on some of these platforms like ChatGPT and having you, like putting in your website and saying like, what does this company do? Can you give me an overview of this company's, like your brand services or products or whatever it is? Because I think it's relevant, right, to understand like, is the language I'm using on my website easy to understand enough for ChatGPT to spit out that like correct answer? Or even do something a little bit differently. Like if you are a healthcare software in a specific area, put in like, what are the top 10, 20, whatever, right, providers? One, that'll give you an idea of if you're being cited, but also if you're not, it's like, okay, is that because they're just not seeing my stuff? Or is it maybe because I'm not positioning the content on my website to align with this thing in the way that I think that I am? Question from Steven. Should we need to revise our existing content that already ranks to make it more GEO friendly, or will we just write new content instead? Great question. I think, and the annoying answer is, I think it depends. I think that a lot of GEO best practices are also good for SEO. So longer form content, there's a way to continue to incorporate keywords without, while also adding more enriched stuff. So I think kind of a combination of the two, taking your SEO content that performs well and making sure that it implements some of these best practices around tone, schema markup, incorporating multimedia content, all of those things. Like none of that is going to harm SEO performance. In fact, it would likely improve SEO performance. And then I think there's also an opportunity to think through, how are you utilizing other content around your site? So maybe it is a like specific use case that you want to write a specific blog article on that might be too specific, right, to be necessarily SEO focused, because maybe nobody's putting in like that hyper specific kind of keyword, but could be really valuable from a GEO perspective, talking about like your products or use cases or things like that. So I would say probably a combination of the two. My recommendation would be to start with what you already have. Most organizations, if they've been doing SEO for a while and their SEO is going relatively well, there is probably a lot that you can do to accelerate your GEO progress without having to like reinvent the wheel. And then once you've addressed some of that existing content, starting to think through, well, where are some of these kind of more fringe use cases for LLMs, these other, generative AI platforms that maybe again, like weren't relevant for SEO, are now relevant for GEO, and I could create some content around. I would probably do that second, but it's realistically, it's probably a combination of the two. All right. Any other questions from the group? Stephen, you are so welcome. Oh my gosh, we went 10 minutes over, but I think these questions were really useful. I hope that I was able to share some insights there. Everyone should receive the recording. So, if you want to go through any of this, please feel free to review it on your own time. And of course, again, if you have additional questions, you want to talk about what AI visibility looks like for your specific organization, we'd love to have a conversation. Please get in touch. And hope you guys have a great rest of your day. You guys were a great audience. I really appreciate the engagement, and happy Wednesday. All right. Goodbye, everybody.